Welcome to episode 71 of The Route, presented by Jobs in Sports. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat. As a new guest every episode, as they share their experiences and route in sports. I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. So, on today's episode, we have an amazing guest coming to us from Hamburg, Germany. So, very exciting there. And, before we speak to a guest, just a few things to cover as always. The first, we are now on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, shout out to you guys. If not, and you're on one of the other platforms, please subscribe on either YouTube or on Apple, Spotify, etc. And then additionally, like or rate 5 stars on the platform of your choice. But all of that does help us grow for the future. So thank you for that. Just take a little moment to do that now. Now that you've done that, the last thing to cover before we get into today's guest is we have social media accounts now for the podcast. So that's what we'll be releasing and announcing the episodes, where you'll see the little magazine cover that we make uniquely for each episode. So that's at The Route Sports on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, all that good stuff is there. And now that we've covered those stuff, we can now get into today's guest. So let me just bring them on here. And our guest today has sports and entertainment experience spanning across 6 different nations. So I'd now like to welcome the Director of Global Business Development at Sportfive, Saorabh Sharma. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
I'm doing great, Chris, and happy to be here. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. It's always a pleasure to speak with someone new. Yeah, the real way that we kind of start every single podcast with our guests is, take us through the route. That's what it's all about. So maybe where did you go to school and how do we get to where we are today?
Yeah, so my journey started in India, let's say it like that. I was
Mhm.
back in India for 27 years of my life. So started school in a very small place called Pillai. It's in the middle of nowhere. So most of the guys don't even know about the place. But the place is very famous for, having Asia's largest steel plant. So almost everyone who's living there works there. So,
Mhm.
yeah, studied there. Did engineering close by. Um, I'm a communications engineer. Yeah, and after graduation, even during engineering, I was not really clear whether I want to be an engineer or not, or whether I want to be electronics engineer or not. But back in the days, you didn't knew better, so did my engineering, and after that, it was much more about getting a solid job and start to get some experience. So worked in a IT services company, the big ones, for 3.5, 4 years. The sports was always in my mind. Sitting back in India, looking at Champions League matches at 1 a.m. in the morning.
Mhm.
You always, next day go back, sit with your friends and talk about, okay, one day, someday, someday.
Mhm.
It'd be nice to end up in sports industry, wherever it is. So yeah, always loved sports, participated in quite a bit, played nationally, under 16 hockey. So did all those things. And after that, I decided that, okay, IT was really not my thing. So
Mhm.
I wanted to do something, explore something, but it's like when you're in a box of IT, it's very hard to get out
Mhm.
without anything else. So I decided to pursue MBA. And unfortunately, it was around 2010, right? So
Mhm.
financial meltdown was still going on, economies were reeling. So I started looking around that, okay, where can I go, which is not really costly,
Mhm.
where I can get it done or get it over with my MBA within a year. So that was one of the key criteria. And also another thing that I looked at, okay, which economies are still okay, not they are all struggling, but not really, really struggling.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I looked around and found that Europe is much more suitable for 1 year MBA. It's cheaper, and so decided to apply in Netherlands and Germany. Got into Mannheim Business School in Germany, the top school here. So that was one of the key things that I wanted to do, to study in it, good school that yeah, it's all about probabilities game, so increases my chance of getting something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and during that time, I started making some connections in sports and entertainment industry through a couple of my friends, a couple of my classmates. And yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, I just was so fixated that I wanted to work in management consulting
Mm-hmm.
that I decided that okay, yeah, let's do some internships, get some experience, and I didn't even speak the language that well. Still don't that good. Um, yeah, so did three internships. One of them was with a media and entertainment company, and that helped me a lot, quite a bit, because when you work in an industry which you had no clue about, you start to look behind the scenes what's happening and everything. And they had a big sports division for media rights, so I started making a couple of connections there, and through that, it opened quite some, like yourself, networking opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I did networking opportunities, and through that, I started peeking around that okay, what do you do in terms of commercialization? How do you look at a football club? Because that's what I was focused on.
Mm-hmm.
What are the different areas? What are the different sections? Who are the key guys? What they do? So that sort of like coffee chats, but on phone.
Mm-hmm.
So did that, and during that time, I saw the ad for my current company that they were hiring a consultant, but German language was mandatory. I thought that okay, if I don't apply, there's no chance I'm going to get anything. Let's apply. What worst can happen? So I applied. They liked my profile, and yeah, so my boss who took my interview is still my boss after 7.5, 8 years.
Wow.
And yeah, yeah, gave my interview, and the interesting part was it was a case interview, and I still remember very vividly. It was analysis of Serie A, and what I did was I used my knowledge, and the interview was scheduled to be 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I prepared a 60 slide presentation.
Wow.
Right? I went all the way in, starting from macroeconomic analysis to clubs, to leagues, and stars, and X, Y, and Z. So my interview went for 2 hours, and after that, they gave me pretty good feeling that okay, it's looking good, and yeah, ended up in Sportfive. So that's more or less my journey to Sportfive.
Yeah, no, that's definitely has its twists and turns. And before we kind of started recording and we were chatting, that's kind of the beauty of the podcast, right? Whether it's, let's say, someone listening, they want to get into sponsorships or marketing, whatever. Maybe they'll listen to a handful of different podcasts. That's the niche they want to get into. But each of those episodes they listen to, whether it's yours, two other ones, or however many, there's none that are the same, right? And it's kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier, and that's kind of the best part of your route, right? So that's amazing. And one of the things I want to touch on, I'd like to kind of go back to the beginning of your route, right? And then we kind of work our way back. You're touching on how when you were younger, you and your friends were like, oh wow, what a dream that would be to, work with Champions League or in sports, etc. And the thing that kind of stuck out to me was, how would that take place, right? And that's kind of the big question I had, and most likely most of our listeners here today. So, with that, how did this come about? I know you were saying it was the connections, but that's kind of the big question for, I know myself when I was 18, that was my big thing, right? Like, how do you make these connections, right? Was it just from, I know you mentioned at the media company, there's a division, you're making connections that way, but were you just approaching them saying, hey, I'm Sal, like, hey, how's it going? I'm interested in sports, or was it just something organically in meetings where it came up? How did those um, connections come about?
Um, the two, three different things that I did.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them worked, a couple of them worked, one didn't work. So my approach was either okay, I can add value to the conversation by doing something. So, for example, I approached a couple of guys who are working, in, let's say, ticketing or sponsorship, and I was searching for opportunities in sports. And I always approached them with saying that, look, I've been to your ticketing website and I did X, Y, and Z, and I felt these are the couple of things missing in terms of user experience. That's one thing that I start with. And that really opens the door, because then they're like, okay, this guy has done his homework, he wants to add some value. Hey, what worse can happen? I can give him half an hour. So that A helps out. The another thing I also did was, which was sort of fortunate for me because of my education in Mannheim, um, senior guys within these sports clubs, they have a decent understanding of the university. It's a very prestigious university here in Germany. So that anyway opens some doors. So that also helps out. And last but not the least, people are generally helpful. So if you ask them nicely and tell them that, look, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to invest time, and if there's something I can do to help you out in terms of researching and everything, because I was willing to learn, happy to do that. If there is no issue or risk in terms of you can share the data or not. So that was three or four different ways I tried approaching people
Mhm.
to just learn about this whole world, which never really comes up when you're just a fan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And some interesting points that you just mentioned there, where um, I know I've spoken to, sports business students or business students, et cetera, that want to get into the space. And, they do have those questions that I just asked, like, hey, like, what's the secret, right? What's the secret sauce? How do I get into the industry? And even on all these countless episodes, right? We're on episode 71 now. One of the main themes is people are saying, just be nice, make yourself available, right? It's almost just logical thing that people should know, but you kind of forget because you think to get to, being in sports, you need some secret or some magic, right? And I'm sure there is some luck involved, but it is interesting that you mentioned that as well, because that seems to be a theme right throughout. Um, and I
And
know you can go ahead.
one thing I would like to add here is definitely it's a lot of luck. I won't lie. Um, but it's also is I tried to reach initially the senior guys within top clubs. So let's say
Mhm.
for example, Bayern Munich of the world, right? Because they are at the top, and that's what you aim for.
Mhm.
If you work in sports industry, when you come so far, you want to get to the top, right? So I tried approaching them, but then I realized quickly that those guys, A, they have a lot of work, and B, they must get 200, 300 requests every month, right? Why do they care? So
Yeah.
started it. So I tweaked sort of my strategy a little. I started thinking more in terms of that. Okay, if I have to learn this, why shouldn't I approach the guys who are actually doing this on a day-to-day basis?
Mhm.
So that's why I started looking at one or two level below, so that I can have the practical knowledge. Because if I would start, I would not probably start at the level of biomimic guys. Um,
Mhm.
really a top. So I need to have some basic understanding, and that helped me quite a bit.
And that's a good point, right? Where I've even like looked at that as well, right? When I was kind of trying to make these connections, where you're right, like, excuse me, we kind of touched on this before the recording, how the podcast came about. And my biggest thing was, hey, how can I get the attention or provide enough value to the CEO or, the president of a large club to sit down and have a conversation with me for an hour, right? And the podcast was my vehicle to do so. But another thing that I kind of noticed, and like you said, right, it's almost getting your foot in the door with that organization or club, right? Where it's kind of making connections, right? Hey, can you introduce me to your manager? Hey, can you introduce me to your director, and so forth. So that's very interesting. And the other thing that I kind of want to build on from there, um, actually, before I do so, just touch on the point of luck that you're saying. That is a major factor, right? Where I know
For
people,
sure.
especially with the pandemic, are like, oh, I missed my shot, and maybe I could have said that as well, right? Because the day it hit, I had interviews with different clubs in Toronto, and other clubs were interested in me in the States. But then pandemic, obviously, you can't move around. But now looking back in the future, towards the future where I am now, very happy for that luck, I guess you can say, because I wouldn't have been in the same position.
Yeah. I'll tell you one story that I always remember. I mean, since I've heard that's the story I always keep going back to is
Hmm.
Tom Brady and Drew Bledsoe story. So Tom Brady always tells this story. When Drew Bledsoe got hit, and he was not really a rookie, he was in the New England Patriots for 1.5 years.
Hmm.
Every single day, he worked extremely hard to make sure A, he learned a lot from Drew Bledsoe, and B, He always had reps before everyone came up, or reps after Drew Bledsoe went, so that he's always preparing himself for the game day. And the game became, Drew Bledsoe got hit. He went in, but his reps were so solid. He was mentally so prepared that it was like, okay, luck will find you if you're prepared. That sort of message he always tries to give. So I always try to keep remembering it that, okay, luck will find me if I'm prepared. So that's more or less what I would say to everyone.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that, the Tom Brady, Drew Bledsoe example are kind of great examples, right? Where sometimes you can almost create your own luck. It's basically what you're saying, right? Where just kind of putting yourself in the right place, right time, and being prepared for that moment can kind of let you go in an interesting direction. And that kind of leads kind of my next question fairly smoothly. So thank you for that. You're talking about your interview, right, with the current company you're now, and it was a case study. You're doing your preparation, and you're extremely prepared, right? You're talking about the 60 slides on the Serie A, and I kind of want to dive into that because that's not something many people can kind of get into, or even if it's young professionals now they're listening and they're getting prepared for their first major interview that may have a case study. You mind maybe like running through that, and what is it like? What is it like having this large case study interview, and how can they tackle it?
So it's very hard for me to generalize everything, right?
Hmm.
What I can tell you is my specific situation. So if I look back at my specific situation at that particular time, was I had no experience in sports. I never worked anywhere even remotely close to sports. I had an MBA, but then after that, yeah, it was much more about, okay, learning to get into management consulting. So there was a gap. There was a gap of 12, 14 months, which is very hard to justify, right?
Hmm.
And didn't spoke the language. So all those factors, when I looked at, I asked myself that, okay, look, even if I get a shot to go into the interview, how can I differentiate myself? Because if, let's say, 4 or 5 guys come in, 2 or 3 of them would be very good in sports,
Hmm.
couple of them would be from management consulting or similar to my experience, but they speak German, right? Because that's sort of how JD was created,
Hmm.
job description. So I started asking myself, okay, how can I differentiate myself? And the only way I could see that was that, okay, the guy who might come in from sports background side, he might have experience in 1 or 2 particular areas, let's say
Hmm.
marketing or something like that. Now, the guy from the other side who will come from, let's say, McKinsey's of the world or any management consulting, he won't have experience in sports, just like myself, but he would be very structured and prepared. Now, how can I differentiate myself? And he will speak German. That's
Hmm.
another advantage. So I started asking myself, okay, can I marry those two different parts without German language? So can I prepare something which is extremely structured, which is
Hmm.
across multiple different functions, so that they don't have to worry whether this guy would know, understand A, B, or C, because he's too focused on D. So I sort of structured it myself. And what I also wanted to give them a flavor of is that I wanted to give them that, okay, I can look at the top view if you want me to look at top view, but I'm happy to focus on the areas. And when I focus on areas, I don't want to just give very superficial information, which you
Hmm.
can do research. I want to really give them facts and then deduct something out of it. That, okay, because of X, Y, and Z, I think this is the key message. So every slide has a key message. And those key messages at the end creates the picture. And that's how I structured the whole thing so that it gave me the best shot to differentiate myself from the crowd. And fortunately, it worked.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And also, I have numerous questions just in regards to that whole thing, right? Because that does seem like a large obstacle, right? Considering you're applying for a position in Germany in sports and you don't speak German, and considering that you're able to overcome that, you must have really made an impression. That's why I'm so intrigued by that. Um, do you remember by any chance what this case study or question about the Syria was? Like what problem were
Um,
you trying to solve?
so, not 100%. But I think they told me that they're talking, so they didn't mention the name of the club. So they said that they're talking with a couple of clubs in Serie A, and they want to understand how to best commercialize them
Hmm.
and how What is the issue with Serie A that's stopping them for commercializing? Because you have to depend on league for some things.
Hmm.
And also, in general, how do I see the opportunity in terms of expanding the business in Serie A? I think that was the question. So I can search my mail for sure. And if you want, I can, if I find it, I'll send you later.
Yeah,
But I must have saved that mail. That's a
for
special
sure.
mail.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, that's very interesting, and I guess that kind of leads right to the position that you fulfilled, and even kind of grown how you've gone about it in Sport5 now. You mind maybe touching on how your position looked then and the new position that you're at now? What kind of things do you do, and what are the tasks related to it, or responsibilities, should I say?
Sure. So basically, what I'll do is I'll divide my experience in three parts, right? So, starting couple of years. Uh, so when I started, it was more of a consulting division that I joined. So
Hmm.
we worked with, let's say, PAOK FC in Greek league, in creating their complete commercial strategy, branding strategy, 5-year plan on how they can expand and what they have to do to get there. So it was a very consulting job, which was good in on one hand, but on the other hand, it's a very demanding job because
Hmm.
you have to charge quite a bit of money to deliver something to the club. The clubs are always very skeptical to pay money for anything.
Hmm.
So did that a bit, which was good because that gave me understanding of all the different areas, and also opened my doors to talk with lots of guys from different departments. So you start getting a feeling, and that department then transitioned into stadium operations department, where I told you about my friend in Eintracht Frankfurt, Patrick. He also worked. So we worked together. And the operations department was basically divided in a way that, okay, we have three different stadiums that we worked at. Patrick was operating Groupama Arena along with the local CEO. So you have to have a local CEO who understands the local politics, local team dynamics, local culture, has his own local network, but he also needs to understand. At that time, we were Lagardère, so he needs to understand Lagardère way, how we do sales, how we do marketing, who we contact, what are the processes, what is the existing knowledge we can bring in. He cannot do it by sitting there. So that's why we had guys all those three different projects
Hmm.
who jumped around. So I also worked in Groupama Arena in Budapest. I was main contact, so I lived in 2.5 years in Sweden, Stockholm, for their national arena, which is Friends Arena. Yeah, so we all had our responsibilities, and my main job was to identify that, okay, what are the major weakness we have in those projects, and yeah, how to solve those problems. And if we can use our network in Hamburg, then great. If not, who can help us? That's more or less the mandate. And it doesn't matter whether it's events, whether it's ticketing, hospitality, sponsorship, anything related to stadium. We worked. So that gave a very good opportunity for me to understand how the stadium works in every single aspect of it, and also how events work, which is a key, right? Because to give you an idea, whether you know it or not, but Arena is a 65,000 seater stadium, massive. And the flexibility is you can have a 5,000 seater Elton John concert, and you can have a 65,000 seater national match between Sweden and Denmark.
Hmm.
Unbelievable flexibility. So that gave me an opportunity to work with multiple different events, multiple different problems, because every single event has its own hospitality setup, own sponsorship, and X, Y, and Z. So
Hmm.
pretty interesting. So did that a couple of years, and then the whole business shifted again. So we had different teams in stadium projects. They were all merged together, and it became stadium consult. So not really consulting, feasibility plus design plus operations project. So did couple of feasibility studies. Worked in Spain for 1.5 years for Real Sociedad, and this was much more about stadium plus the club, right? So it was all about selling sponsorship, creating hospitality concept, creating food and beverage concept. You name it, probably I've worked on it. Even ticketing concept, pricing, packaging, marketing campaigns, and so on and so forth. So that gave a very good exposure on how overall a club works, not only commercial aspect of it with respect to club, but commercial and operational aspect of it with respect to stadiums.
Hmm.
So that gave a very good understanding of overall business, how the project value chain looks like.
Hmm.
And my role also shifted quite a bit because I've worked in all these different areas. I started to get more into new products and new opportunities, and mostly into due diligences and so on and so forth. So that to set up those 5-year plans, to set up to do the due diligence whether the current business plan is reflecting what's going on or not. So did all those things, and then because of these different experiences, I got a chance, yeah, to work in business development department. And here the mandate is pretty simple: work across the globe. So we have teams in 10 different countries.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, irrespective of sports, it doesn't matter which sport it is. It could be table tennis, it could be football, it could be NFL. It doesn't matter. If there is an opportunity, you can create new business models, strategic partnership, new product, or open a complete new market, then let's work together. That's more or less the mandate we have. Yeah, so that's one part of it. And over the last, would say, last 4 months, there's another additional part that was added to my um, yeah, my responsibility was working into blockchain and NFTs, right? So we have created a within Sportfive, where our main goal is to figure out, okay, create our USP, create the service line, create the product line, go into the market, and before going to market, yeah, build all those strategic relationships. So I'm leading currently that whole charge. We are defining everything. So that's another very interesting angle that, yeah, I'm right now.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Sounds like you guys touched on a lot of different points, and I can see how fulfilling that position would be, right? Because there's so many different areas of sport that you are touching on, right? Whether it's with the club, with the stadium, and then even under those, entities, there are all those little different fields that kind of fall under that, right? Whether it's like you're saying a concert that's 5,000, and then a national sporting match that's upwards of 65,000 people there, and kind of managing it and going about that. So that's very interesting for sure. Um, so you guys are basically it's like a consulting firm, I guess, for those listening. You essentially work for a consulting firm for these different clubs or stadiums, correct?
So we have lots of different models depending on the project that we are targeting, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, if we work with a club, for example, Borussia Dortmund is our client, right? Borussia Dortmund, our model is have a certain agreement where we commit X amount of euros as part of our commitment to the club.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then there are certain X and Y levels of revenue sharing agreement that we have with them. So that's one model, and that's a completely different approach because it's hospitality, sponsorship, marketing, internationalization. That's different. Then, in case of Real Sociedad, our model was completely different. It was a fixed fee model with X% share if we bring sponsorship and additional opportunities to the club. That's
Hmm.
another. So it completely depends and it changes crazily from project to project in terms of what we do because every club has a different need, every club has different approach, and every club has different thinking. So it's much more about, okay, first we align, and whether it's a club or association or a complete sports authority. Yeah, so first it's much more about, okay, what service lines we can offer because in case of Sport5 we can offer quite a bit
Hmm.
from media to stadium to fan engagement to sponsorship to marketing to hospitality to activation. So we athlete management. So we have quite a range of services that we can offer. So it's much more
Hmm.
about first let's sit together, figure out what's the thing that works best for you, which is needed at this moment. So
Hmm.
once you do the low hanging fruits, it becomes much easier to upsell because then they've already seen the work we've done. Um, yeah, Sportfive brings its whole brand name, which also helps us in opening quite a bit of doors and yeah, also gives certain, yeah, good feed into these different assets, we can deliver because we've delivered for quite some time. It's been 30 years since the company was established.
Wow, yeah. No, that's very interesting. And you said something there, but I didn't hear it that well. Were you saying that basically when Sport5 basically starts working with a club or a stadium, you guys basically go after the low hanging fruit, and then you kind of develop from there because you basically showcase your value, and that's how they're like, okay, we trust you, kind of taking on a larger role going forward. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's one of the approaches. So it completely depends. So in case of Real Sociedad, we found out that they are planning to build a new stadium. Now, a lot of times the problem that you see is, and the best example is Wembley. Um, it was supposed to be built at least 30 to 40% cheaper than it actually costed,
Hmm.
right? Because of all the, I won't say wrong planning, but because of wrong assessments, right? So a lot of times we see is, and this is very coming from a stadium point of view, is the clubs and everyone, they first create a design and then they build a business plan. And that's where the problem lies. So in case of Real Sociedad, we went there and we told them that, look, you can make the designs as much as you want, but at the end of the day, if design doesn't fulfill and match with the business plan, then what's the point? So why don't we first create a complete concept, commercial and operational, what you want to do in the stadium, design the stadium around it, and then define the business plan around it, then it will make much more sense because then there's a complete plan of first how you'll commercialize, how you'll operate, and then how you design. They really liked it, and so we started with feasibility. Then we went to second phase, which is supporting them during construction phase, where
Hmm.
like we did a range of services. So we created their complete sponsorship package, a hospitality package, which means that okay, I went through each and every inventory you can think of in the stadium, create a package, brought our main experts within the company who can do this, look and understood the local dynamics, work with the club to define a pricing, completely define the package, completely define look, feel, how they should approach the market, what should be the facts and figures they should show, and then went to the market. So the whole value chain. So it depends from project to project. As I mentioned, we have lots of services. So we can offer quite a bit of different flavors to different clubs, depending on what they want. But it always helps to have them a couple of small wins, then you can jump to the big fish.
Yeah, no, that does. It makes a lot of sense, and some of the things you're saying, it's making me think of just things in terms of my business as well. So that's very interesting, right? Where um, just, making me think some things that I'll have to work on later. But no, it's very interesting. And that was actually one of the questions I was going to add, and you kind of answered it from a stadium point of view. But this is kind of a general question. From an outsider's perspective, with the experience that you have, is there maybe a key area that kind of stands out to you? They're like, hey, most sports organizations are lacking in this area. And I think they need improvement, right? And they could do so by doing this, right? Is there something that kind of stands out to you where you think there's a major area for sporting organizations that they lack?
Um, it depends from country to country, right?
Hmm.
So, let's say UK and Germany also, infrastructure is pretty solid. So I cannot comment anything on the infrastructure. Still, stadiums are old; they could be improved. Sure, they are not NFL stadiums, but there's still some kind of romanticism about stadiums because these are cathedrals that have been established for a long, long time, right? Let's say Stamford Bridge in Chelsea, Old Trafford in Manchester United, right? So yeah, infrastructure-wise, you can improve, but that's not the key thing, right?
Hmm.
So it's very hard for me to generalize. But if you look at specifically, infrastructure is extremely bad because tell me when was the last time a major tournament happened in one of those countries?
Hmm.
It was 70s, right? So because of that, I think it was 80 for Spain, but doesn't matter. The point is the stadiums are really old, really bad. There is no fan engagement. So if I go and tell them, hey, by the way, guys, we have a pretty solid fan engagement thing, and we can also put connected stadium, these Wi-Fi and X, Y, and Z, and these guys will be like, what are you talking about? Our stadiums are 45 years old. What should we do here? So it completely depends on the league and the country and problems. So it would
Hmm.
be very hard for me to generalize, but what I can say from my experience across multiple markets is, um, in general, the clubs, they are so much dependent on TV money that they ignore a lot of opportunities in terms of sponsorship, hospitality, and ticketing.
Hmm.
TV money, if it goes 5%, 10% extra, we're talking about 5, 6 million, right? And that's a lot of money that directly jumps from a small thing. But in case of everything else, you need to do a lot of work to develop those parts. But TV money is not forever, as we are seeing in current situation, right? But
Hmm.
fans, especially the local ones, who always feel that okay, because of TV money, we are not treated so well.
Hmm.
Build those engagement and relationship with, especially the local fans slash community slash brands, then it helps quite a bit over the longer term. It's long time to get there, but then it's a different story in terms of how much money you can make over the 10, 12, 14-year period in terms of initial investment. So it's initial investment versus the safety of the risk that you will have over the longer period of time. That's how I see it, if I have to point something.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I believe I had a meeting maybe a couple of weeks ago, and it was someone in the UK, and that's kind of something that we were touching on about how everyone, like you're saying, everyone made such big importance on TV deals, and actually even right before coming on this, I was listening to a sports podcast, and everyone always talks about the big TV or media rights deals. But as you kind of been seeing here, and I think the example that call I had a couple of weeks ago was I think the Sky Sports deal for the EPL um, basically maintained the same evaluation right from the last deal, right? Because they're almost doing them a favor. But as the next one comes, it's going to start getting devalued because less people are actually sitting down and turning on their cable or satellite TV, right? They're streaming it on their phones, or they're just watching the highlights. They're basically consuming the product in a different area. And that's what you were saying there about how fans are kind of the bread and butter, where they're almost the tried and true thing that are the consistent or will be the consistent if you treat them correctly. So that's definitely an important factor that I definitely see, even especially here in North America, right? They're always more worried about getting more people in rather than focused on, you know, building that base that they have here. So that's interesting. And I guess the kind of if you're going to touch on something, go ahead.
Yeah, just one thing. I mean, the fans who are 20, let's say 25 years old, they are still, and they're going to be a fan of the club for a long, long time. The
Hmm.
problem starts between age 17 or 16 till 23, 24. Those guys have way more options. They are growing up with esports. Suddenly, traditional sports are interesting, but not so much that they cannot live without it. Because when I was growing up, there was just football. There was nothing else. Football and cricket as an Indian, right?
Hmm.
So these guys are growing up pretty differently. So that one age group, and if you go one age group back, those guys are completely growing up in esports, right?
Yeah.
Fortnites of the world. Just imagine where you can go inside the Fortnite, you have your own avatar, you're sitting with your friends, eating your virtual popcorn, having chat on TeamSpeak. It's a different world which we never had, right?
Yeah.
So if we don't adapt, then overall sports is going to have a problem. And the way I see it is, that's what I was talking with a friend of mine a couple of days ago is, and it's a bit of a philosophical thinking, is that
Hmm.
okay, when initially it was you deliver mails via courier were there,
Hmm.
but then you identify, okay, mails that you can actually send it via postman and ship it via planes and everything. So it completely changed how society interacted, right? There were much more letters and everything. Then again, a big change came when suddenly phone was invented, right?
Hmm.
Even people are willing to hold, but you still reach your main person within X, Y, and Z minutes or even hours, right? Which is still faster than delivering mail. Society changed again completely,
Hmm.
right? Then came the email and everything, initial part. Society changed completely again. Then came mobile phone. Society changed completely again. So we are again at the internet, completely changed everything, how we talk, how we do, who we interact with. Like you said, It's network effect. The whole world is available to us, right? WhatsApp is the same thing. I don't really write letter or email or something. I just drop a WhatsApp to my family, right?
Hmm.
We are very much, society changed again. So we are again at a very crucial juncture with metaverse and blockchain technology that in 4 or 5 years is going to change everything how we do it. At least that's how I see it.
Hmm.
Now, if sports is not ready for that particular thing, then we have a big problem, especially traditional sports. And that's where I see the biggest issue that's going to come in the next 5 to 7 years, because then suddenly these 11 to 15 years old are 20 years old and 16 years old, and they have much more spending power, right? Because they'll get their first job, or they'll have much more saying in where they spend the money. Because as an 11-year-old, if I ask my father, he'll say, "No, you shut up, and I'll spend the money because X, Y, and Z. You don't know." But as a
Hmm.
16-year-old, I have a completely different way of doing things. So,
Yeah.
and then so I'm really worried how this is going to translate if sports industry is still slow to adapt.
Yeah. No, and that's an interesting point that you're saying because I think I'm basically at that weird cutoff between millennial and Gen Z or Z, I guess people say. Um, because I grew up, I'm right on the border of it, and I think I have these fan bases, and those are the ones I stick with. Or even I was having a conversation with someone the other day where they're a few years younger than me, and even though they're only a few years younger than me, what we consume in terms of content, sports, etc., is completely different. I'm a diehard Ottawa Senators, New England Patriots fan. I follow the team, but then they were saying how they're like, oh, I don't follow a team. I follow an individual player, or I follow a streamer, or I only watch the highlights, right? Or my club has been horrible the last 4 years, but I've watched every single game because that's my team. And I think that's even an impact where the business I have, White Whale Marketing, where we're actually helping these athletes develop and build their brand. That's where teams are going to start seeing the value. Where I even had a meeting with the team last week, I believe, and I know 3 years ago when I talked to them about building up the athletes' brand, they're like, I'm not too sure about that. And then now last week with the change in the evolution of sports, they're like, hey, you know what? We might work with you going forward because we see the value in actually building up our athletes because that's actual importance and that's what keeps people being a fan of that certain club. It's not actual the crest anymore. It's more of the individual personalities, right? So that's definitely a big thing. And the last thing I'll even touch on that we just finished sharing a post from on our social media right before this at White Whale Marketing, where one of the tools that we kind of use, it was showing when I think the club was the LA Sparks, so the WNBA team. They announced that they're partnering with Jordan Brand. Okay, so they make their post they're like, hey, we're now in partnership with Jordan Brand, and the social value on that post on Instagram was I think $1,027, which is fairly nice. And then one of their athletes, so a player of the LA Spark, did their own post on Instagram saying, hey, I'm excited for Jordan Brand to be in partnership with the LA Sparks. The social value on their singular post, I think, was $247,000 worth of social value. So if that doesn't kind of express how important athletes and the brand and the way this new generation consumes sports, that's something that people need to start focusing on. And I guess I got in the right time to get into sports marketing, but definitely interesting times ahead, which I agree with going forward.
No, I agree
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of maybe end the interview slightly, one of the things I was going to ask before I kind of get to my last two questions is at the beginning, let's say we're going back to providing value to this young listener that we have here. You're touching on how you'd maybe go to a company's website and be like, hey, I notice X, Y, Z. I think you can improve these areas. So if we're giving that advice to a young listener, a student, a young professional listening, do you have any more advice to build on that? Because maybe at first glance, someone's thinking, "Hey, I'm only, I don't know, let's say they're 18." Would the company not be offended that are like, "Hey, what does this 18-year-old think? He knows more than us with 25, 50 years of experience." So how did you kind of go about that without offending the the person you're approaching is what I'll ask, because I think that'd be something of value for people listening.
I mean, it's a loaded question, right?
Yeah.
Uh, okay, let's break it down in the way that okay, first I'll talk about what they can do. Second, we can touch upon how a person could or could not react, which completely is anyone's case, right? So first, about what they can do is um, generally what I'll say is a lot of people don't continuously gather skills. It's like they have certain skills they get comfortable with, money comes in, and they don't try to expand either that skills like crazy, go really deep, or keep learning the new skills. So I give an example, right? If you go to Twitter, and I don't have an account or anything, but I still go and read news because it's a very good source of, if you know how to curate it, to find news very quickly, right? So Twitter, if you go to even big companies, really big companies, like you said, we were talking about engagement, right? So that's why I came to this Twitter examples. A lot of these companies, and even the LA Wings or whatever the club's name is, um, yeah, the club's engagement is so poor. Now, if it's 18-year-old or 19-year-old, 17-year-old, it doesn't matter. If someone tells them via facts and figures that, okay, look, guys, these are the five things that are completely missing, and these are the five ways. I did a research of, let's say, 1,000 different tweets across NWSL over the last 6 months. Yeah, so you have to do your homework. It's not something which is like you can do this and it works, right? So you do your homework and you say that, look, I did research of 1,000 tweets, and these are the 10 different themes that come out of it, which always go viral. So there's higher probability of these themes going viral. Why don't you have a look at it? And if you want, I can help you. So that way, you're more or less ghostwriting. Ghostwriting is anyway a big business, right?
Hmm.
You're helping them engage more, and the more value they have, they don't care if it's a 17-year-old, or they shouldn't care if it's a 17-year-old, 19 or 45-year-old. So that $1,000 value of one post changes to 25,000, and voila, they have a lot more sponsorship money that they can ask. So it's much more about fact-based approach, because facts don't care about your feelings, right?
I love that. That's funny you mentioned that, because obviously there's always new competitors, different things like that, and we were kind of doing research last week, and I noticed apps or other agencies, let's say, they're always throwing a lot of fluff. I'll say that's what I'll say. They're just spewing the nice things, making it look nice, etc. They're dancing around the main topic. But then simply, I was like, how can I show people in a simple manner that we provide value? I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna put a graph out. A graph does, numbers don't lie, right? Where it's a fact, right? Where we kind of essentially shown the amount of value you can provide, and then you literally see on the graph like or I guess with the camera inverted, it'll be this way. But
Yeah.
you can essentially see it. I love the way you kind of put that, because that's something that I try to do as well. And I think for someone listening, or young professional, whoever, 45-year-old, like you said, I think if you can build out an argument, let's say, where it's just strategically facts, numbers, etc., we're almost building it out to when you kind of get to the ending and you present it, you almost built out such a great argument that there's not even really a decision to make, right? Or like, oh, you know what? We do need to work with Chris or Sal or Joe on the street, because he kind of provided an explanation of X, Y, Z. Here's how you solve that. And there's nothing you can really counter that with unless you don't have the resources or some other factor, right? So I think that's some great value that you just shared there.
And
And
one thing I would add is almost all the clubs, doesn't matter whether you're super big or super small, everyone has a resource crunch.
mhm.
I've never seen a club which says that, yeah, we have enough. We don't have to, because we have enough people. Everyone is struggling. So you just have to find the place where they're struggling, by talking to a couple of guys in the club. And once you see the place they're struggling, that's your opportunity to go in, because if they're struggling, they need more support. And if you can, as a young person who can go in and do something, they'll be more than happy to have an intern who can do initiatives and it's much more about flexibility, right? If you can do five different things, you're way more liked than if you're just one thing guy. Um, so
Mhm.
that would be my thinking overall, how you can approach.
I completely agree. That's how I kind of get into the sports industry, right? Where I mentioned to you earlier, I was in accounting, didn't have any really marketing or sports experience, and I just kind of went to companies. I'm like, hey, you don't have someone in marketing or social media, communications? I'm like, I'll do it. And then I kind of just took it over while I was there, built up some amazing experience, proved myself, and then allowed me to kind of further develop. So I think that's some great advice. And kind of transitioning as we kind of end each episode, I have two questions I'd like to ask everyone because I think there's some amazing value here. The first, it's pretty simple. Um, if you could kind of go back in time and speak to a younger version of yourself or even to someone listening, what career or even life advice would you provide that you think I wish I knew that when I was younger?
Um, Understand the value. So three things basically. Understand the value of compounding. So if you understand how compound interest works, life is really good.
Hmm.
If you invested 10,000 in 20 years old and then you take it out at 45, life is good. So compounding is one thing.
That's a good one.
Yeah, second thing I would say is it doesn't matter what you do. Do six jobs, seven jobs, it doesn't matter. Buy Bitcoin. Yeah, so that's the second one. And third one is, it's a sort of now looking back, it makes a lot of sense. So when I was growing up, everyone told me that, look, yeah, you don't get too serious between 20 to 30. Male life starts when you start getting responsibility, well, serious girlfriend, or wife, or X, Y, and
Hmm.
Z. Then you start getting really serious about life. So that phase will come. I see it differently. It should be inverted. So 20 to 30 is the most important time in your life. Struggle, try, fail, move around, try again. It doesn't matter. What worse can happen? You can get rejected. But if you play your cards right in 20 to 30, that 10 years, 30 onwards, your life would be breeze because by 30, you're anyway in such a settled position that compounding has already kicked in. You already know which direction you're going. So by the time 35 or 40 comes, you're in such a good place in terms of financial, emotional, physical state that it's much more manageable and life is much more simple to enjoy. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, no, that's some great advice where hopefully, people take that away, right? Where that's definitely, I know some of these things I've done myself, and even just since being 18, like I've already started to see some of the benefits from it. So I definitely agree with everything that you said. Bitcoin, we'll see, but because that's obviously in the future, but that's in the future.
I mean, if you
And
had 1,000 and you could have sold
yeah,
60,000, life would have been different. So,
yeah, for sure. And then the last question that I typically have for everyone is obviously everyone that comes on, they have very interesting, unique careers, right? But I find everyone has a unique story. So is there a moment in time that kind of sticks out to you when working in sports? Or like, wow, I can't believe I was able to kind of work on that.
I mean, a couple of moments, I would say. All at Stockholm Conference Arena. So it's basically, first one I would say is, so that was very special for me. So I was standing next to the pitch and it was International Cup of Champions match. So you have Barcelona versus, um, yeah, Barcelona versus Leicester City. So at that time, Riyad Mahrez and all those guys were playing for Leicester, and Barcelona was also in the stadium, and they were doing their own practice. So I was like 5 feet away from really those superstars
Hmm.
that you always admired, Rodriguez of the world. Messi was not there because he's Messi, so he didn't practice. But almost all the other guys were there, Suarez and everyone. So that was unbelievable. Thinking back, like I said before, right? You wake up in India 2018 as a young kid, in 2008 as a young kid to watch Champions League match at 1 a.m. Suddenly you are standing in front of the guys that you hate sometimes or more times, but they're there and they're like superstars and they are the biggest players in the world. So that's one. Second one was pretty special, I would say, for my wife, because it was Beyonce concert, and so they were bringing Beyonce to the main stage with a car at the back. So it's just standing next to the stage. She walks in, and it's basically again 5 feet from Beyonce. So my wife was pretty excited. And last, what I would say, I had a chance to meet with the guys from ACDC. So
Wow.
that's that was pretty cool. So as an Indian guy, you never expect to see ACDC, but here you are getting a chance to meet with those guys. So I would say those were the moments where you think, oh Jesus, it's different.
Yeah, those are amazing. And you know what? That's why I like keeping that as the last questions. I find it's a perfect way to end the podcast on a high note. So, unless there's anything else you'd like to share, thank you for coming on and sharing your route.
No, I mean, Chris, it was really nice talking with you, and thanks again for inviting me and coaching me in LinkedIn. Hopefully, I added some value to the whole discussion. And if
Absolutely,
you have any questions, please reach out. If I can answer, I'm happy to answer.
absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on, and I think it was a great episode.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, bye
And
bye.
speak soon. Cheers.